Hi everyone, it's me again, wearing my Beatles shirt today, doing my very best John Lennon impersonation. I wish. So I want to talk to you just about a couple of things. We were talking earlier about the mediant relationships and so on that occur oftentimes in late 19th century music. I neglected, however, to mention a particular technique that shows up sometimes as well, which is called an omnibus. And it sounds like something you would write in England, but it's not. It's a musical device that was used oftentimes by 19th century composers when they desired to, quote, harmonize a non-functional chromatic bass line using familiar chord types. This is called an omnibus. Basically what you've got is a progression essentially from 5 out to 5, or maybe to 1. But basically it's again a type of a chordal embellishment using very fast-moving passing chords. So here's what we would have. Now we could, if we wanted to, go to all the trouble to analyze each and one of those chords, but why bother, because the overall effect is that of 5/7. Which might resolve then to 1. Here's an example from a piano sonata by Franz Schubert. We're going along like this. Now, listen here. So, essentially, if I pare this down to its most basic harmonic function, it's just 5, 5, 2, 1, 6, 4. But he creates a much more interesting texture and sound by moving the bass and the soprano chromatically apart from each other. That's an omnibus. Chopin uses a good example of an omnibus in his famous military polonaise, the one that goes like this. In the middle section, I played that very poorly, by the way. In the middle section, there's this famous moment where we're going... right here. This is an omnibus, 5, 2, 1, in this case D major. He could have written, but it wouldn't be as interesting. And it creates a sense of tension, waiting for, yeah, there's the resolution. That's an omnibus. Okay. Now, as we move into the 20th century, I am moving onwards and upwards to chapter 26 in the textbook, which I want to highly recommend that you read. Let me just talk to you for a moment about this. As composers moved into the 20th century, we found that the system of functional tonality had basically been stretched about as far as it could be. And composers, after Wagner in particular, were sore pressed to find a way of writing music that stretched chromatic boundaries any further. So what they did in some cases was to go back in time and re-embrace modality. That is, the old modes that had been used in the music of the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance period and so on. Other composers took Wagner's chromaticism to its logical extension of making everything chromatic, and we have the 12-tone series that's being created and then adopted by other people, that was associated with Arnold Schoenberg. Now, these are two very different things. So we're going to start talking about the modalities and also some of the, we call them synthetic scales, that composers began to use to move beyond major and minor. I think if there's one thing I would say about all of this, is that major and minor scales become increasingly endangered species at this point in time. Now, you may have talked about modes in earlier classes, but we have 7 basic modes which we can make easily correspond to each of the white notes on the piano. If we start on middle C and just play the white notes, we have our major scale. However, before it was called a major scale, it was known as the Ionian mode. By the way, this is all on page 465 in the text. If we start on D and play the white notes, we have the Dorian mode. If we start on E, the Phrygian. On F, the Lydian. On G, the Mixolydian. On A, the Aeolian, which also is identical to our natural minor scale. And on B, we have the Locrian mode. Just to give you a quick example, since I'm wearing my Beatles t-shirt, this is Mixolydian mode. And so modes are used in popular music, they're used in contemporary music, and jazz in particular. Modes are very, very important. But at the end of the 19th century into the 20th, classical composers, for lack of a better word, began to re-explore what modes were capable of. No one probably more so than Claude Debussy, a French composer, born, I think, in 1862 and died in 1918 during the bombing of Paris. He wasn't killed by a bomb, but he was in Paris during World War I when Paris was being bombed by the German Air Force. Well, did they call themselves Air Force? Luftwaffe, I guess would be the term. One of the things that Debussy really liked to experiment with was an unusual scale that really isn't necessarily modal, and it's not major or minor. It's called the whole tone scale. Now it sounds like this. And it's called whole tone because it's made up of all whole steps. There's no half steps at all. Whole, 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 whole. And if we pare it down, it basically is 2 augmented triads. Now, by its very nature, therefore, it's very ambiguous as far as tonality is concerned. And Debussy uses this very frequently in his compositions. One in particular that comes to mind is called Sails or Veils. I'm not even going to try to say it in French. In which we have sounds like this. I'm sorry. So, whole-tone scale. You might be familiar with whole-tone scales from cheesy movies where someone goes into a dream sequence and they play, because it sounds kind of dreamy in that sort of a way. Well, I'm going to encourage you to go further on YouTube and look up a performance of this piece by Debussy. There is one, I'll try to link it to you somehow, that has the music so you can follow it. Voiles. I don't speak the French well enough to tell you. From Preludes, Book 1, Claude Debussy. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I'm doing better at putting together a Canvas page. I hope to have one for you very soon. I've got things going a little bit for Theory 2, and now it's your turn. So if you have any questions, as always, just give me a call, text me, show up at my doorstep, whatever you want to do. Okay. Beatles. Beatles forever.